Morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's Enterprise Connect webinar. Operator Connect, Direct Routing and Calling Plans, a masterclass in Microsoft Teams telephony, sponsored by Bandwidth and broadcast by Informa. I'm Eric Kraft with Enterprise Connect, and I'll be your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. This webinar is designed to be interactive. The dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn about today's speakers, download resources, share this webinar via social media outlets, and participate in the Q&A session that takes place at the end of our presentation. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. You also download a copy of the slides via the resources widget. Toward the end of our webinar, we'll ask you to complete our survey found on the right-hand side of your screen. Please take a minute to fill this out before leaving us, as your feedback will provide us with valuable information about how we can improve future events. Lastly, if you're experiencing any technical problems, please click the Help widget found at the bottom of your screen, or type your issue into the Q&A area, and we'll be glad to offer one-on-one assistance. Now on to the presentation. Our speakers today are Irwin Lazar, President and Principal Analyst at Metrigy, and Michael Brousseau, Customer Solutions Architect at Bandwidth. Irwin, Michael, I'll turn it over to you.
So let me go ahead and start with the agenda, and welcome. Thank you, Eric, for the introduction, and thank you to everybody for joining us, and look forward to, for me and Michael, to have some time to chat with you today about what we're seeing in the marketplace around Microsoft Teams telephony and what your options are and what might be your best option given your environment. So we'll start with talking about what we're seeing overall in the market as far as the trends toward cloud migration for companies that are looking to move to Teams telephony. We'll talk about how you evaluate your needs based on the kind of organization that you have and your specific operating environment. We'll share some insights into the different options that you have as you're thinking about whether or not you go with direct routing or Operator Connect or calling plan or even the new mobile offering. And we'll provide some deeper dive insight into what some of the benefits and potential drawbacks are for each of those different approaches. Then we'll provide some insight into picking the right provider. All right. So let's go ahead and start with our first poll. Eric, why don't I bring you back in for this?
Okay, thanks. We're just going to ask simply, does your organization use Microsoft Teams for calling today? Do you use Teams exclusively for your voice calling? Yes, in addition to other UC platforms. No, but you're implementing it soon. No, but you're evaluating Teams phone system. And it's interesting. We don't offer the choice, and it probably rightly so, that they have no interest. I guess partly you probably wouldn't show up for this webinar, but it's probably given how ubiquitous Teams has become. The option, at least, of adding telephony and voice to the Teams that you likely have rolled out to some degree is probably something everyone is considering if they haven't already done it. Is that fair, do you think, both of you?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, from what we've seen in our research, we just published a study a few weeks ago that showed that roughly about 20% of the market right now has adopted UCaaS or Unified Communications as a Service. Of those, about 35% are using Teams. Of those with Microsoft Office 365 licenses, a fairly large percentage are considering using Teams telephony. So yeah, look, very anxious to see the results that we'll get here.
Michael, any thoughts? Maybe you're on mute, Michael.
Yeah, sorry, just in relation to the context of whether it's, again, Operator Connect, direct routing, the selection choices for calling plans, we're going to discuss each of those in comparison to one another. It's not only discussing kind of the momentum of the shift from on-prem to cloud, but directionally and from a pathway standpoint, what it means specifically in combination with looking at Microsoft Teams. What are the options for you, perhaps as an enterprise or a small business, to review, if you will, the different decision matrices that go into what ultimately makes most sense for you as an enterprise or a small business?
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and push out the results then. And looks like we've got widespread usage, but still a multiplicity of platforms. So I'll turn it back over to you, Irwin and Michael. You can discuss this and move on.
Excellent. Michael, any thoughts on what you're seeing on the results here?
Yeah, so the 50%, in addition to other UC platforms, right? So it's one of many. And again, not everybody's made a decision. Perhaps why some of you on the call are here today is just to understand a little bit more about Microsoft Teams in particular. And if the class today, if you will, assist you in that capability of informing you with kind of the full-blown capabilities of Microsoft Teams, then fantastic. But yeah, this is something we see. Everybody's looking at options right now across the board and evaluating their decisions for UC platforms.
Excellent. And we'll talk some data coming up that kind of reinforces what we see here and what you just mentioned.
All right. So I touched on this briefly a minute ago, but there is an extensive, let's call it in the past couple of years, focus or migration towards the cloud. And really there's some driving factors towards that, right? It really is an extension of digital transformation. When everybody's IT departments were looking at moving their server infrastructure to the cloud, the communication stack or the PBXs or the CCaaS or the on-premise, whatever it might be, is simply an extension of that. So the next iteration is perhaps, folks looking at what they can do in the cloud versus on-prem. And again, some of those driving factors are vendor consolidation. Maybe I've got a plethora of different options in there. I'm using everything from a UC platform, version in this area or this department to another separate PBX in this geography or whatever it might be. So consolidation on the platform, certainly significant. Cost cutting. Obviously in these days and economics times, right, everybody's looking at what it means to run their own infrastructure in comparison to the costs in the cloud. So that could be a tandem of both CapEx and operational costs, everything from maintenance and support agreements that are included in there, and then understanding what's available within the different ecosystems, the different PBX or CCaaS platforms that makes it more, let's call it consumable. So the cost associated is more based on how you're actually using it versus the assumed bundling of unnecessarily components. And then last and foremost is, some of you may have already made a decision. Obviously, 50% of you are still undertaking the evaluation here to determine what UC platform makes most sense for you. Obviously, today we're going to be talking pretty in depth on Microsoft Teams. And even within Microsoft Teams, you're going to see that there's multiple pathways of how you want to actually utilize, if you will, the calling PSTN capabilities of Microsoft Teams itself.
Let's go ahead and advance for our next slide. And again, I think echoing everything you just said in terms of those drivers to go to cloud. I mentioned we published a recent study. This was 440 end users in North America, Western Europe, Southeast Asia, and Australia, and looking at what they're doing with respect to telephony. So still a slight polarity that is on-prem, about 32%, but about 29.5% that are now full cloud UCaaS, multi-tenant type approaches. About 21% they're still using hosted solutions. Small percentage, about 12%, mostly very small companies that kind of foregoing the enterprise phone system in favor of just mostly using mobile devices. Or if people are working from home, they just get local numbers. But a lot of those drivers are what you talked about, things like cost savings, better support for work from home, so I don't have to go through a VPN to make a phone call and experience lag and delay, all of the features that are now available through the cloud, the ability to quickly establish presence in different markets. And even to that poll response we saw before, of those who are on-prem, 17% or 16.4 are still using, are also using cloud. There about 14% of that on-prem group is planning on moving to UCaaS. Of this entire set of folks, roughly about 20% were using more than one phone system, more than one architecture. So they may have, via acquisition, we bought a business unit that's using Microsoft Teams phone system, but we might have another legacy on-prem or private hosted solution for the rest of our company. So lots of variant out there and not really a one-size-fits-all. Any thoughts, Michael?
Exactly what we see, right? I mean, regardless of whether or not you're an enterprise or a small business, right? The sizing components really is still the same. You might not, as a small business, be acquiring companies to Irwin's point and have multiple different platforms, but the cost savings might be something that's more indicative of your decision as to why they go to the cloud versus staying on-prem with a platform. So absolutely.
So, we talked about the focus here around Microsoft Teams, and why is the reason for the focus, I think, is the momentum behind Microsoft Teams. Among those who've already adopted UCaaS in our research, it's roughly 38%, 37.3 actually, that are using Teams. That's the biggest among any of the vendors that we watch. And then we looked at this group of folks who have Microsoft 365 today. They have the licenses, either E1, E3, E5, or any of the other variants that are out there. And they're not using Microsoft as their phone system. So they've got a secondary provider. And we asked them, what are your plans to adopt Microsoft Teams phone system? And as I mentioned earlier, roughly 30.4% they're adopting this year, about another 6.5% planning on adopting in beyond 24 or later, and about a really large amount, about 39% that are evaluating. So it tells you, again, that there's a lot of momentum. There's a lot of questions in the market. We're kind of at this inflection point. When I look at our data around what are companies using for meetings and messaging, you see, 70, 80% of the companies in our research pool that are using Microsoft, but a significantly smaller amount that are using Teams phone system and are in that mode of, we're starting to kind of figure out how do we get through that Teams phone system discussion. So, Michael, let's talk a little bit about how we integrate, or what are the different options for adding calling into Microsoft Teams.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Irwin. Really, for those of you who haven't seen, this is a client slide of Microsoft Teams. And really what most people are interested in is, okay, great. I see the slide. I see the button that you've highlighted here on the left, which is the call button. That's really what we're talking about here. What's the calling capability that's powering that button itself? So when I receive an inbound call, make an outbound call, am I doing that directly as an example with Microsoft Teams? Am I doing that directly with a carrier? And is my architecture demand that I'm actually utilizing an on-premise SBC architecture as well? Obviously, from a client perspective, 100% transparent, right? So your decision into what you do, whether it's one of those three options, your end users don't necessarily care, right? There's no visibility in the client itself to the fact that you've chosen Operator Connect or direct routing or calling plans, right? So that's certainly to be aware of when you're looking to deploy Microsoft Teams. The other thing is that there are going to be criteria that probably shift you in one direction versus another. And we're gonna touch on some of that in a couple later slides. But that can include things as obvious as, hey, you know what? I have 200 users, 200 employees, versus another company that might have 10,000 employees. And then there could be some decisions as to why you want to do something differently for a 200 user shop or employee shop versus a 10,000 user shop. It's not that all the options are necessarily different among them, but it's based on your specific business requirements as to what will drive you to focus on one iteration. Again, calling plans, direct routing, and Operator Connect, all those three iterations of selection choices you have when you're looking to power your system with Microsoft Teams.
So as we move into the discussion of the different options, it's worth taking a minute to just kind of figure out what are the kinds of questions that you need to ask before you go through that evaluation phase. As Michael mentioned, there are a number of different options, and they're really invisible to the end user. So now we're in a back-end administration configuration operation discussion. And so the first set of questions that we often look at with our clients is, where are you heading and how quick? So do you still want to maintain that on-prem infrastructure for a period of time? Might you also have additional on-prem infrastructure, say contact center platforms that you want to unify PSTN access across both cloud and on-prem? That could certainly guide you in a different direction. How are you going to manage phone numbers? How are you going to manage provisioning of phone numbers? What tools do you have today? What kind of call routing capabilities do you have? Have you implemented, say, least cost routing to be able to send calls to that might be international out across your data network to lower cost pathways to reduce, again, PSTN expenses? Where do you need to operate? Where do you need to have phone numbers? Where do you need to have a local presence? What do you need to integrate with? Again, if it's contact center, if it's multiple UC platforms, what do you need to ensure that you have consistent integration with? What are your plans around that contact center platform? Are you also moving it to the cloud, or will that continue potentially to stay on-prem? And do you anticipate converging contact center and UC at some point. And where are you in your Microsoft Teams journey? Are you still operating, say, a competitor of Microsoft Teams for meetings and messaging, and you're not 100% fully deployed onto Teams? So that might impact how, if you haven't moved all of your users onto Teams and they're still using other applications for messaging, for meetings, for calling, then it may slow down or impact how you're going to migrate your overall base onto Teams. And then lastly, how are you going to support 911, especially obviously for companies operating in the US, but similar regulations in Europe and Canada that can allow you to ensure that you're compliant with appropriate regulations here in the US. We're looking at Carey's Law, which requires direct dial to a 911 operator without a prefix, requires notification of on-site or appropriate personnel when a call is made. And then Ray-Bowles Act, which requires dispatchable locations. So if you're moving to a hybrid environment where people are moving to an ability to make calls through soft phones, you know where those people are. So if they dial 911, that you can get first responders to their location as quickly as possible. Michael, any other thoughts of things that we'd want to consider?
Sure. Yeah. And really, I thought what we do is just give an example. So make it a little bit more tangible. Let's look at call routing, because again, not everybody might understand that the means of when we say it as a question. Think of it as you've got an on-premise platform. Again, we'll just pick on a vendor here for fun, Cisco, right? On-prem, you're looking at doing something perhaps with Microsoft Teams. Great, fantastic. But your migration timeframe might be 12 months. And there will be users over time that are going to slowly move them one at a time. So to ease let's call it the burden of going through not only a porting exercise, perhaps, as well as a platform change, one of the ways that we work with enterprises to ultimately connect with their existing platforms as a first step, while also connecting with Microsoft Teams and alleviating that as a pain point. Again, some enterprises might require extension dialing between Microsoft Teams and maybe their existing on-prem platform, and to which naturally you will require something different than calling plans, because inherently calling plans is a Microsoft-only capability. Something like direct routing could give you flexibility while you can connect to your existing on-prem platform and Microsoft Teams to not only help with intercommunication between the two platforms, but perhaps ease the burden of migration as well for an enterprise. So that's just an example. Again, when we get into the question and responses and what it means for you when you're looking at the different iterations of Microsoft Teams calling.
That's a great segue into those different iterations. So I know we talked through some of those and start to dive into the specific options that are out there.
Yeah, this is great. So clarification point here, we're going to read this from left to right. Again, simple to complex. So left to right, starting with bundled telecom. Again, calling plans. So if you're a Microsoft shop and perhaps you want to have a very easily consumable, administrated, simplified journey for your customers without complexity of routing, then calling plans is certainly something you can look at, right? And we're going to, again, compare and contrast some of the differences. But why you might want to choose calling plans are things as simple as it's easy, it's off the shelf, right? I'm buying my licensing with Microsoft. I might have E3, 5E1, and I'm just adding the phone option. Easily done to add the calling plan in there, domestic, international, wherever you might need. But it's typically a bundled price. And again, what we mean by bundled would be that it includes a set of minutes. Whether you use them or not, they're available on a per user basis. So a per user, per month, MRR, MRC type of a subscriber model. But again, not all the flexibility you might have with some of the other iterations moving from left to right. Teams Mobile in the middle is another example of a fairly new product from Microsoft, and this is really geared towards those wireless needs that an enterprise might have specific to how they support their employees. This is not to be confused with anything that's client-based from calling plans, operator connect, or direct routing, but this is specific more or less addressing the SIM wireless market or in having to work with a wireless carrier in particular. So this would be, again, just another iteration of a platform type that Microsoft supports today. As we move onward to Operator Connect, Operator Connect is, again, one of the newer iterations that rolled out specifically with Microsoft. And we'd like to think of it as a bit of a hybrid between calling plans and direct routing. So with Operator Connect, it is a BYOC play. You are having a direct relationship with one of the carriers that are listed under the Operator Connect tab in Microsoft Teams, and it is a purpose-built certification process for these particular carriers. What that means for you is that they've gone through that checklist of things to make sure that the appropriate degrees of interoperability exist, that there is continuity between the Azure cloud and the carrier, and that it's a seamless, if you will, interface or UI to administrate, if you will, your numbers and assigning your numbers to Microsoft Teams users. I call it a hybrid because with Operator Connect, the numbers within a carrier will automatically sync with the admin screen in Operator Connect. So the beauty of that is it's not a function of having to utilize multiple portals to get the work done. It's really so that you can do the majority of the work in the Operator Connect portal to administrate and assign capabilities of calling to your individual users. Far right, as we go to the unbundling, is another BYOC example. This iteration with Microsoft has been out for several years. It really comes in two flavors to the degree that a carrier supports it. Direct routing simply means that you're bringing your own SBC. So you as a business have decided that you want to mediate the traffic between the carrier and Microsoft. You might decide to do that because you want to maintain that infrastructure. You might decide to do that because, as we talked before, you want to have calling capabilities at an extension level between your two, maybe your on-prem based PBX and what you're going to with Microsoft Teams, as well as control and over your routing itself. So with direct routing, again, your options are you can bring your own SBC, or some carriers supported what became a precursor to Operator Connect, which is a hosted model where that carrier is hosting a specific set of SBCs on your behalf that is tied to direct routing. And so again, your flavors are there from calling plans to Operator Connect to direct routing. The two on the right are BYOC. The calling plans capability is direct with Microsoft Teams and how you consume your calling services itself. Irwin, anything else to add there?
No, I think you did a nice job explaining the different options. So let's dive a little bit more deeply into them. As I mentioned, the study, I saw a question come in asking about the characteristics of the folks that we talked to. So I mentioned this was a study we published last month, about 440 companies. Average employee count was around 6,300, and it was across a range of organizations. And we asked the people that were using Microsoft Teams as their Microsoft Teams phone system as their calling platform, what were they investing in? And so you can see the majority were using direct routing for PSTN access, about 14.6% that were using Operator Connect, and a little under 10% that were using calling plan. And a lot of times the folks that are using the direct routing and Operator Connect, at least on the direct routing side, tend to be larger companies, tend to be multinationals, tend to have a lot of legacy infrastructure, tend to already have contracts in place with SIP trunking providers that they need to maintain, or they're using it as an inflection point to look at new services that are out there. Where we tend to see calling plan much more focused on smaller enterprises, very simple companies who, like to your previous slide, really have far less complex implementation requirements. So Eric, I think we have another poll.
All right, here it is. Which do you anticipate being your primary means of PSTN connectivity for Teams Phone? Would that be calling plans, Teams Phone Mobile, Operator Connect, or direct routing? And we'll give everybody again a couple of minutes to answer the question, and maybe so we knock out, because we're getting questions at a pretty good pace, maybe quickly. We can ask the two of you just what does it mean for an operator to be Microsoft certified?
Yeah, certainly. I'll take that one. So Microsoft for both direct routing as well as for Operator Connect has a series of requirements that they demand of any BYOC carrier to meet in order to, let's call it, gain the certification. That certification can come in a couple different forms. That certification can be in the capabilities of a provider to provide coverage within a particular area, a country as an example, or multiple countries. And then it extends that across to include things like emergency calling in a particular country, similar in the US because of the current, federal regulations around 911 with nomadic users versus static users. But there are a set of basically tests, think of them that way, that a carrier has to abide and adhere to in order to gain that level of certification to offer the services to begin with. Operator Connect in particular adds another level of complexity to that because they demand dedicated interconnects from the carrier to the Azure cloud to specifically carry only Operator Connect traffic. So again, there's both the testing that has to take place for certification, there's the testing around different governances or countries, and then there's the interconnects that need to be in place depending, again, on the type of direct routing Operator Connect versus calling plans that a particular carrier offers. Did that hopefully answer the question as well?
Okay, and I'll go ahead and push out the poll results, and here they are. It looks like we got a direct routing crowd here. So again, turn it back over to Irwin and Michael, and pick it up from here.
I think that's almost spot on with the data we had, maybe a little higher interest in Operator Connect among our audience. All right. So, Michael, why don't we start talking about the plans in a little bit more detail, and we'll start with calling plan. I'll turn this over to you.
Yeah. So calling plans, I believe it was 13%. You keep me honest here, Irwin, on the last poll results that we had. But so for those of you interested in calling plans, this is again a simple out-of-the-box experience. You're purchasing your licensing directly from Microsoft. It is based on a let's call it a subscription model where it comes with a preset minutes on a per plan basis. So there's the domestic plan. And then separately, if you want international, there's an international bolt-on plan that you can add to any one of your users as needed, given your requirements as a business. It is a simplified interface. What we mean when we talk about simplified is that you can do everything within the UI itself. So basic administration, if you were assigning a calling plan license to an end user, then you have the ability to obviously assign that phone number respective of that calling plan directly to that user. Again, all using the administration interface, the Teams administration tenant, if you will, to conduct that. So it's very straightforward. It's very simple, and it's designed around the goals of making it very easy for a business to utilize. Therefore, maybe the con to that is limited customization. So call routing complexity and things like that are not going to be a capability of calling plans. Microsoft is your single source for everything. So that includes troubleshooting. So they are, for all intents and purposes, your carrier of record, if you will, on the numbers. So it's going to be a couple of things, right? It's dependent on Microsoft's coverage area geographically as to the extent that you might want to choose calling plans or not. I believe there are 16, 17 countries, something like that at this phase, but they're adding additional countries. So always be up and on the latest, greatest as far as coverage goes, but it's a subset as to what most other carriers can provide. And then support, I mentioned this early on, but support is going to be via whether it's a ticketing system, whether it's a support number that they provide you, depending again on your licensing purchases and things like that, will govern their responses. So if you're content with that, then calling plans is kind of a simple get forward started plan. We see a lot of businesses that start this way and then over time might roll to maybe a more complex plan because of their requirements and or the costs that we talked about early on. Perhaps it's prohibitive for some customers to do this at scale as to why they might not want to do this. But for the most part, this is a great plan in comparison to the other UC offers that we see out there in the industry.
Excellent. I agree with everything you said. Again, that simplified, lower cost, much more suited to smaller companies, but also that big drawback of that having to go through that porting of numbers to Microsoft, having to rely on Microsoft for support, probably not applicable for mid to large size companies. As we go to the next one, we start to get into the BYOC options, and we talk about, as Michael mentioned, when we started going through the overview, the predominant ones being Operator Connect and direct routing. We saw in our poll, it was about 24%, Operator Connect about 54%, direct routing. And Michael, why don't you give us a little bit about the benefits, and I'll talk about some of the drivers that we're seeing in our research.
Sure. Yeah. Whenever we bring up the word porting, most enterprises have fear that's visible in their faces because they all have had a bad experience in the past, right? And so, depending on the carrier, one of the things that we make very easily is the idea of a rollback, and that might not be something you can get with a Microsoft directly, but with us, as an example, right? Having that snapback capability or having to do porting after hours and where it makes more sense for your business, you'll have more control over that with a BYOC relationship with a carrier. Obviously, we talked about maximum flexibility as it relates to call routing, things like that. They are inherent as part of a BYOC offering. Direct line to support. This is one of those intangibles that, it's somewhat left out of the decision-making criteria, but it becomes something that a lot of enterprises deal with on a day-to-day basis because A, they don't have the appropriate portal access to control their own self-service capabilities within the portal itself, and the only method of doing that is via a ticketing system. Having that direct relation with the carrier for who ultimately is going to be providing the underlying PSTN capabilities is valuable for a lot of enterprises, again, as to why BYOC are not. We talked about cost savings, especially in this environment and economic call it paradigm that we're in right now. Cost savings is one of those things that it's absolutely up there at the top. We see most companies that we talk to in reference to anything they're doing to the cloud is around a high on the list is cost, right? And that ROI that they're going to get as they make a decision to roll out Microsoft Teams versus platform B or C or D. Anything else you would like to add here, Irwin?
I'll echo what you just said about cost. The chart on the right is from our data set of companies that had adopted direct routing. We asked them why, or what were their drivers, and obviously there can be more than one. That's why this adds up to well over 100%. But yeah, cost savings was really the biggest one. We published some data a couple of years ago where we looked at the average cost of Operator Connect versus direct routing at the time. Those were really your only options. Direct routing versus calling plan. Operator Connect, a relatively new offering. And at the time, companies were paying on average a little under $5.65 US per user per month for PSTN connectivity in the direct routing approach versus, we'll talk more about some of the pricing, but the typical pricing at the time for a calling plan was it was $16 per user for domestic minutes. And in that case, you're getting a set of minutes that you may or may not be using. So a significant opportunity to save money through direct routing. We talked about that ability to control the phone numbers, especially avoiding porting. You mentioned that raising the red flag. We see that as well in our data. Again, especially if you have other phone systems, you have a contact center platform, et cetera. You may have contracts that you need to continue to maintain. Maybe you signed a 3-year contract with bandwidth. And you have to continue to maintain that service as you move to the Microsoft telephony world. You may have multiple cloud services. Again, it could be multiple UC platforms, contact center, et cetera. And as Michael mentioned, I think it's roughly about 16 countries now that Microsoft provides phone numbers in. But if you want to have local dial in anywhere in the world, then you have to look at a direct routing or even an Operator Connect solution to be able to obtain services where you need them. All right. So, Michael, let's talk a little bit more deeply about Operator Connect.
Yeah, perfect. So again, we're going to go through each of these, and kind of compare and contrast them in the next couple of slides here. So with Operator Connect, again, unbundling the telecom. So it's a BYOC offer, which means it's pure cloud. We refer to it as a cloud-to-cloud architecture. The bandwidth cloud talking directly to the Azure cloud, to which Office 365, Microsoft Teams tenant is a resident application at the end of the day. So there is no infrastructure that you as a customer, if you will, as an enterprise or a small business have to maintain. It comes with natural benefits, right? It's typically based on the cost model that is unbundled, which means you're paying for only what you ever use. That can include DIDs, that could include 911 or emergency calling capabilities, depending on the geography. And then it's based on how you use it. So the usage specifically on those numbers, you might have, as most companies do, a subset of your users that don't call as much as others, right? You've got your power users and things like that are making calls inbound, outbound all the time, but you might have another subset that aren't really using it that much. So why pay for the bundling of that cost if it's an unnecessary need that you've got as a business, and why not only ever then pay for what you're actually consuming? So it makes more sense, certainly in the SaaS-based models and the cloud-based architecture models that we see present today, especially with Microsoft Teams. Operator Connect is, again, a very simplified user administration interface. When we talk about direct routing, a lot of folks that may not be familiar with PowerShell have to get familiar with PowerShell very quickly as a way to scale this thing out with direct routing. Operator Connect, while you still can use PowerShell at scale, the fundamental capabilities exist where you to assign numbers that are Operator Connect based numbers to a user directly in the administration portal. So there isn't a need, if you will, to have to or to require to utilize PowerShell. PowerShell is really a scripting engine, if you will, that for some of you that use Microsoft in particular might be familiar with. For those that aren't, it's a mechanism to create scripts, if you will, to spread out the launch or the migration of this within Microsoft Teams. The last, not least, obviously, is we talk about reliability and support. We mentioned Microsoft certified operators in general as a requirement. For your name to show up on the Operator Connect list, you had to have gone through that certification process. Obviously, the coverage is expansive. We ourselves as Bandwidth support 38 countries for full PSTN capabilities. And what we mean by that is simply inbound, outbound, porting, emergency services, local numbers, national numbers, geographic numbers, and toll-free numbers is kind of the capabilities that exist within those 38 countries that we support today. So again, it's based on what a particular provider can offer within the marketplace. And then with Operator Connect in general, you've also got this shared SLA concept. So Microsoft is going to support obviously the application itself, the workings of the Teams administrator, the functionality therein, and then the carrier, in this case, Bandwidth as an example, would also offer SLAs that are unique to Microsoft Teams or to the carrier, and all carriers have this as a capability as well. The picture here on the right just is to avoid the use of having to worry about the infrastructure. So you see in the box here, it's got the PSTN and the SBC services themselves surrounded with the Operator Connect, which means the carrier functionality is providing this. There is nothing that it required on-prem or in a customer's data centers for this functionality to work. Turn it back over to you, Irwin, with any other add-ons for Operator Connect.
No, I think, again, you defined very clearly, what we've seen in our research is it's becoming somewhat overwhelming now. If you go into that Operator Connect console and you start to look at the different providers that are there, there's not a lot of tools that allow you to figure out which one you need other than where they're offering services. So it's becoming a little harder for the buyers. You may have thought, well, this is going to be simple to figure out what provider makes sense for them. So definitely requires some due diligence. And now let's talk a little bit more about direct routing.
Yeah, perfect. So direct routing it's been around for a number of years. Based on the polls, obviously there's quite a few of you that are interested in direct routing, and it could be because of your complex routing. It could be because you want greater control over the routing itself. It could be that you have multiple carriers you're using, and maybe this is your ease of administration of supporting those multiple carriers. Whatever the reason is, direct routing is basically a call control capability that routes, if you will, through some degree of on data center or on an employer provided session border controller, right? So it just simply means, if you look at the box on the right, before I talk about it specifically, the box on the right just simply means that there's a certified SBC, which is again a Microsoft requirement if you can use direct routing, that's either in a cloud or in your data centers themselves. And it's providing that call control, that mediation that we talk about in providing services to Microsoft, the phone system itself. It is increasingly a little bit more complex. You can manage everything in PowerShell for this. So obviously Microsoft continues to make enhancements to the UI, to the portals, to make it a little easier. It's not quite the same with direct routing as with Operator Connect, but I figure over time they're gonna kind of become a little bit more similar at the end of the day. It's highly configurable in a sense because you're controlling your SBC. You can do things with it that perhaps Microsoft wouldn't allow you to do with calling plans, or perhaps even a BYOC carrier won't allow you to do. So the level of configuration, if it's your SBC, you can do things to it that you can't do without that control. The complex integrations that I mentioned really references the using that as a focal point for your multiple different PBX platforms that you want to obviously consolidate over time, but it could be an extensive period of time that demand that focus or having that level of call control. You can with direct routing, and this is important because it's unlike Operator Connect. With direct routing, you can actually have a 911 only capability in the US. So because it's a distinct product in the US is the way that calls route for emergency calling, you can decide to go with one carrier for PSTN with direct routing and another carrier just for emergency services. In some ways, that's an easier endeavor for you to utilize. There are only 3 emergency service providers that are certified for direct routing with Microsoft Teams. Obviously, Bandwidth is one of those, and we have multiple customers that have started to utilize Microsoft Teams, specifically going the advent of utilizing emergency calling and using us as that capability. So obviously 911 becomes important with direct routing. And then the added layer of support that we talked about with Operator Connect, it is provider led, which means that BYOC provider, that company that's providing you direct routing, SIP trunks, if you will, maintains that level of support. Any escalations for Microsoft have to be escalated again through that Microsoft ecosystem via support ticket, a platform, but your reliability is based on the carrier you choose. So when you're evaluating different carriers, you're going to want to look at reliability. You're going to want to look at what partnerships they've had with Microsoft, what geographic coverages they have in your overall decision-making here as well. Anything else you want to add, Irwin?
Yeah, just to answer a question that came in, someone asked if there's a charge to use either direct routing or Operator Connect. We'll talk a little bit more about cost in a minute, but no, these are services that are available. You're only paying for the carrier, whatever the carrier is charging you to support PSTN connectivity, again, whether that's their Operator Connect or direct routing. All right. So Eric, we've got another poll on what are people using, or what are they? What have we changed any minds? I guess is what we're going to ask.
All right, so given what you've heard today in this webinar, what is your preference for PSTN connectivity for cloud calling services? Would it be bring your own carrier, BYOC, bundled telecom, a combination of both, or are you unsure? So while we wait for the answers to those questions, I don't know if this is one that we can question we can knock out kind of quickly, but we have a question. Who are the 3 carriers that are certified for Direct Connect?
Sure, I'll take that one. So the 3 for, when I mentioned certified, it was in relation to emergency calling. So there's a separate certification for obviously emergency calling. If you wanted to use direct routing and have a different, obviously, PSTN provider versus an emergency provider, those 3 providers are Bandwidth, Inteliquent, and Intrado or West. If you're familiar with the older or the newer name with West and Intrado.
Okay. Give it maybe just another second here and push out the results. We can again, still have time for the rest of Q&A. Here we go. So primarily BYOC is we hear from the audience today.
It's interesting the 24% say combination because it isn't an either or. We see companies who may say, you know what, I'm going to use a calling plan for a small remote office of 5 people, and I'll just get them the calling plan licenses, and then we'll use direct routing for the rest of the organization. So there is that opportunity to mix and match depending on what your needs are.
Yeah, and more specifically, you can match all 3. So you can have a tenant with Operator Connect, with direct routing, and with calling plans, because again, the licensing is specific to a number. So it's easy for an organization to maybe, go in first with calling plans, as I mentioned before, then go with direct routing, or have a context that Irwin mentioned, where it's a particular geography that might mandate one or the other as well.
Excellent. So let's do a final deep dive of the different options that are out there. I mentioned we get into some of the costs. So the calling plan options do vary, but the most basic one provides Microsoft Phone System license as well as as well as a package of minutes. And then we've got the Operator Connect direct routing. That's the Microsoft licensing cost. Michael, you want to go more detail into some of the different comparisons? And then I'm happy to add in.
Yep. So again, one of those things that is, some of this is based on your licensing that you've got with Microsoft to begin with. If you've got E1 or E3, let's make it simple. So E1 or E3, you've got to add the phone option to begin with to utilize any of the BYOC or even the calling plan capabilities. So it enables think of it as enabling that button on the client that says call. That's really what that licensing does. With E5 with Microsoft, the phone option is built in. So you don't have to have a separate license for that, just to make sure everybody's on the same page here. Again, if we start at the top with comparing the cross, the $8 fee is based on that phone option cost. And so that's why you're going to see similarities at the top end between Operator Connect and Direct Routing, because those costs are the same. Those are Microsoft costs. Then you've got below that the provider's cost. So this is going to be dependent on what the usage model is, how many users you've got. They might even have tier-based pricing that drops the price lower and lower. Again, the dependency there is on that carrier you ultimately select as to what the ultimate charge will be. And then obviously with calling plans, you've got the phone option built in, plus the bundled of minutes that Irwin touched on earlier. As we scroll down this list, feel free to take a snapshot of it. Obviously, this presentation will be visible for everybody afterwards as well. But this is kind of what we see into what decision-making someone is utilizing between all three of the capabilities here. Generally, the calling plans we've seen with more SMB markets, we haven't seen too many enterprises want to go and purchase at the cost level for tens of thousands of users, if you will, for calling plans. You typically see that as you go up in scale with the number of users wanting to look at Direct Routing or Operator Connect. Both can provide that functionality at scale. There are really no limitations there. The infrastructure, the only one we'll discern is the difference here, because again, Operator Connect is cloud infrastructure, calling plans is cloud infrastructure, Direct Routing is, that bit of a hybrid where you've got an SBC on premise perhaps, or in your data centers, and that is your call it your mediation into Microsoft Teams. Again, as we scroll down here, number management. Again, some of this is dependent on which platform you choose. Easy for use in calling plans because it's built into the UI as well as Operator Connect. And then Direct Routing, there's some capabilities in the portal, but we've seen most companies want to utilize PowerShell to deploy this at scale to a number of large user base. Flexibility, I think we've probably gone through this enough here, but even the complexibility as it relates to things like, I've got physical devices, I need to register these to an SVC before it talks to Microsoft. So maybe that's a simple one, right? If your business still demands and it has a requirement for still static-based phones, hardware-based phones, as again, one of those other flexible tools that you've got with Direct Routing that you don't necessarily have with calling plans or with Operator Connect, because it's a software-based world versus, a world of the past. We're still touching physical infrastructure at the end of the day. The providers, as we mentioned, you've got BYOC providers on Operator Connect and Direct Routing. You've got a Microsoft certified operators specifically within Operator Connect as an ecosystem or in the marketplace that you've seen within Microsoft tenant. And then the coverage. So it comes down to what are the needs that you've got from a geography standpoint. We talked about the coverage that Microsoft currently has themselves with calling plans. We talked about bandwidths with our 38 full stack countries that we've got for either Operator Connect or Direct Routing. But again, one of the things you can do in the Operator Connect portal is to sort by country. So what is the geography you require? And from a list of, I believe it's 48 or 49 today, I haven't looked, but it's somewhere in that high number where there are certain providers that are in there that might only have audio conferencing capabilities. So it's going to be a smaller subset. They might have just Teams phone, mobile phone capabilities, or they're only in particular geographies. So, there's a good way to filter based on your own criteria and how to go about selecting a carrier for your specific needs. And last but not least, we touched on this briefly, the support, right? You've got your first level, second level, third level support with calling plans, all with Microsoft. There is no direct relationship with the carrier. With Operator Connect and Direct Routing, you've got somewhat of a difference in that you've got a shared SLA model with OC or Operator Connect, and then you've got whatever the carrier is offering you for Direct Routing from a tier 1 and up, or a first line of defense standpoint up through obviously some extra licensing you can buy with premium services from Microsoft.
And I think the only thing I would add to that is, again, it requires some due diligence. There's a lot of different providers, and as Michael talked about some of the benefits that the bandwidth offers, it's not a decision you're solely going to make on cost and coverage, but you're going to want to look at support options, support for compliance like Kerry's Law and Rebounds Act that we talked about, the full stack of services that are available to you in each of the different regions or countries that you need to operate in. So it kind of segues us into our final slide. Michael, why don't we go through what are some of those other factors that folks should be thinking of as they evaluate the different direct routing or operator connect provider options that are out there?
Yep. So thanks, Irwin. If we look at just BYOC, again, this would be purchasing your direct routing or your operator connect feature set from a carrier. Beyond just coverage, one of the things that we always discuss with enterprises is the global regulations. So the compliance of those, how close are they to the PSTN? Are they one hop, two hops? Are they direct to the PSTN? Are they a national operator? Would be another term that you can look at when you're going through the decision-making complex of determining what carrier versus one carrier versus another. Emergency services capabilities, obviously in there as part of the decision, specifically to the U.S. as the demands that require there for federal regulations, but even elsewhere, right, where emergency services is seen more of a feature on the line versus a separate product. Are they fundamentally Microsoft certified? Do they have a good relationship with Microsoft? Had they been doing Microsoft for a while? Is this a net new iteration of a capability that they have never done before? And therefore, they might go through some pains and processes getting you onboarded and settled. So definitely spend some time looking at that as peace of mind. In the middle here, we've got coverage. So global network is one thing. I mentioned the compliance and regulations that come with that, but also what is their ability to provide services and distinct services in those countries? So it can't be just an inbound only service with a UC offering. It's got to be both. They're going to need to be able to port numbers, and they're going to need to be able to provide just more than perhaps a geographic or a non-geographic number, like a national number, plus, and we see this quite a bit at toll-free. Although you don't see a ton of toll-free because it's not a contact center platform per se. We do see a lot of use cases where folks are utilizing the service capabilities, the resource accounts within Microsoft to provide a basic ACD, and that's powered by an incoming toll-free number as an example. How and the support side, what is their model for support? Is there a follow the sun model? Do they have localized support within these countries? Do they have awareness of the specific requirements within each country for things as basic as local address restrictions, service activation restrictions that certain countries demand you have in place before you can offer and provide a particular phone number to a company. And the third under the hood, if you will, it's SIP. Obviously, we're still talking about SIP trunking, SIP capabilities, whether it's BYOC or not, emergency, and then SMS in one. So having kind of that three-factor in place there. Inherently, Microsoft doesn't support SMS. So if you're going to do any messaging within Microsoft, it's all chat, as most of you have seen. If you wanted to add SMS, and if that's a requirement, certainly look at a provider that can add on SMS capabilities within the Microsoft Teams ecosystem as well. And then future-proofing, right? So what are the integrations looking like for something that's going to support you beyond year one, year two, year three, year four? Is it scalable, right? And especially there's a lot of folks that are going through acquisitions in this day and age. How scalable is this? If I add another 1,000 seats, what is this going to mean? How quickly can a company provide porting capabilities across the board in the geographies that are set? And then just specifically with Microsoft, less about the BYOC provider, but if you're a partner with Microsoft, you're going to always adhere to those latest developments, the latest iterations of a new feature that gets rolled out. For those of you that have paid attention to the Microsoft roadmap specific to Microsoft Teams, it's in depth. And obviously they recognize themselves. They're still not maybe a like-for-like match with traditional legacy-based on-premise systems, but they're going to get there, right? And as you can see, they've been doing this for a while. Everything from beginning days of Link to Skype for Business and now Microsoft Teams. you're going to see a lot more focus on making that as parity as possible, so that there's an easier decision that you make as an enterprise as to selecting a vendor or a company like Microsoft to begin with. But as it relates to BYOC, those are some of the main ones that we see that are driving the focus as to, why carrier A versus carrier B. And certainly this is something that we as a provider, as Bandwidth, enjoy the competitive nature of the business and success with.
Excellent. And I'll just home in on two things. I know we're running short on time. We're going to have a couple of minutes for Q&A. That complexity one is what we see. We have conversations with our enterprise clients, and they're trying to evaluate which approach to go down. Direct routing offers a lot more support for complex environments. If you still have analog lines, if you still have alarm systems, if you need wireless solutions, SMS is really another big critical area that people look at when they're trying to figure out what direction to go. As you mentioned, Microsoft doesn't natively support SMS and calling plans. So having that ability to tie text messaging to company provision phone numbers offers a lot of value from a compliance standpoint, and from keeping people from using their personal devices, personal numbers for business communication. So with that, Eric, why don't we bring it back in? And I've got a few minutes here, it looks like, for Q&A.
Okay, yeah, I think we've got time for about one question. And I want to ask there's a lot of detailed questions, and everybody who asked your question, we've got those, we'll capture those in a report, and we've got your contact information from when you signed up. So the participants here will be able to respond to you offline. But I want to ask kind of one of the sort of higher level questions that I thought was interesting. Somebody's asking, how is the move to remote and hybrid work impacting these choices and decisions?
Oh, I can start with that one. We have seen that hybrid work has been a strong driver of moving to cloud communications in general. If you think about, if you're running an on-prem phone system and all your employees are working remotely, they have to connect in via VPN to make a phone call. And so you're adding additional delay, additional complexity. Often it creates performance issues, not only for voice, but even if you have, say, on-prem video. So that's been one of the big drivers moving specifically to cloud. With respect to which cloud PSTN connectivity option makes sense, I haven't seen as much of an impact in terms of remote hybrid work, other than ensuring that you can support 911, especially here in the U.S. So if people are working from home, you can't just assume that they are going to know that if they have a phone on their desk or somebody makes a call, even through a soft phone, that call may not know, the 911 emergency call center operator may not know where that person is and may not be able to automatically identify him. So that's something you definitely want to pay a lot of attention to. And those of you attending Enterprise Connect, we'll be doing a session on that Monday morning with Bandwidth and myself. So I think that's the biggest factor, I would say, as you're thinking about PSTN connectivity and remote work. Michael, any comments?
Yeah, it's really that nomadic user. And at the end of the day, the driving force between looking at different providers has been how that provider handles emergency services, the capabilities, the support for the PITA-flow headers that are used with Microsoft Teams for dynamic location routing, as an example. That's really been more the questions that we see as to, looking at provider A versus B as the driving force as to what decision they're making there in the matrix. To your point, Irwin, emergency services is the thing that most are honing in on, is absolutely ensuring that they're compliant as an organization, because the law demands it, right? The nomadic requirement went into effect in January last year. So we're a year in past that, and we're still obviously some folks out there that aren't compliant with those regulations. And this is just a means of performing that. And you could do that absolutely with Microsoft Teams in combination with a carrier that supports that.
Definitely.
All right. So with that, we are right at the top of the hour. So I want to thank our panelists, our speakers today, Irwin Lazar from Metrigy and Michael Brousseau from Bandwidth. For the audience, we are going to get a personalized follow-up email in the next 24 hours with details, and that'll give you a link to watch the presentation on demand. And you please do forward that along to anybody else who you think would get as much out of it as you have. This webinar is copyrighted by Informa. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by Enterprise Connect and Bandwidth. The individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. On behalf of our guests from Bandwidth and Metrigy, I'm Eric Kraft. Thanks for your time and have a great day.